The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Texas as Xavier Daniels watched the last of the cattle rustlers flee over the horizon, leaving behind a trail of dust and broken dreams. It was 1879, and the West had become both his salvation and his prison. At 35, he was a widower with 3 children who needed more than he could give them, more than just survival and stern lessons about the harsh realities of frontier life. Xavier holstered his revolver and turned his horse toward home, the setting sun casting long shadows across the landscape. His ranch, the Broken Arrow, sat nestled against rolling hills, the modest 2-story farmhouse standing as a testament to his late wife Eliza's dream. She had died during a fever outbreak 2 years prior, leaving him alone to raise their children, 10-year-old Jacob, 8-year-old Sarah, and 6-year-old Thomas. As Xavier approached the house, he noticed a wagon he didn't recognize parked out front. His hand instinctively moved back to his gun, years of vigilance impossible to shake off. He dismounted cautiously, his spurs jingling against the hard-packed earth. "Pa! Pa!" Thomas came running from the house, his face lit up with excitement, something Xavier hadn't seen in months. "There's a lady inside making biscuits." "Real biscuits, Pa?" Xavier frowned. "What lady, son?" Before Thomas could answer, the front door opened, and a woman stepped out onto the porch. She was slender but strong-looking, with auburn hair pulled back into a practical bun. Her dress was simple but neat, and she carried herself with quiet dignity. "Mr. Daniels, I presume?" she called, wiping flour from her hands onto a worn apron. "I'm Cassandra Norton, the new schoolteacher for Silver Creek." Xavier removed his hat, suddenly aware of the dust and sweat that clung to him after a long day's work. "Madam, wasn't expecting company. Mrs. Patterson from town sent me out this way," Cassandra explained, her eyes kind but direct. "She mentioned you might have a room to let. The schoolhouse isn't ready yet, and I need somewhere to stay until it's finished." Xavier shifted uncomfortably. The idea of a stranger, especially a woman, living in his home stirred a complex mix of emotions. "Town's full of boarding houses, Mrs., she corrected gently. "I'm a widow, Mr. Daniels. And yes, there are boarding houses, but none I can afford on a teacher's salary if I'm to save anything for the lean months." He noticed then the thin gold band on her left hand, and something in him softened slightly. She knew loss too. "Your children have been wonderful hosts," Cassandra continued. "I've helped Sarah with her reading while waiting for you. She's quite bright." "Sarah hasn't touched a book in months," Xavier said, his voice betraying his surprise. Cassandra smiled. "Sometimes a fresh face can make a difference." Xavier looked past her to see Sarah peering through the doorway, a book clutched to her chest, one of Eliza's that had remained untouched since her death. "Pa, can Mrs. Norton stay?" Sarah asked, her voice small but hopeful. "She knows stories about places far away." Xavier felt a tightness in his chest. His children needed more than he could give them. He'd known it for some time, but had been too stubborn to admit it. "I'll pay fair rent," Cassandra added, "and can help with the children when I'm not teaching. I'm a good cook, too, if you hadn't noticed from the biscuits your son mentioned." The aroma of fresh-baked bread wafted from the house, reminding Xavier how long it had been since the home had smelled of anything but basic necessities. "Where are you from, Mrs. Norton?" he asked, still cautious. "Boston originally. My husband Charles was a doctor. We came west for his health, the mountain air. It didn't save him." Her voice held the steady resignation of someone who had made peace with grief, something Xavier hadn't yet managed. Xavier looked at his daughter's hopeful face, then at Thomas, who was bouncing on his toes with excitement. He thought about Jacob, who'd grown too serious too quickly after his mother's death, trying to fill shoes too big for him. "The room at the end of the hall upstairs," he finally said. "It gets the morning light. Rent's $5 a month, includes meals." Cassandra's smile was genuine. "Thank you, Mr. Daniels. I promise I won't disrupt your household." Xavier nodded curtly and moved past her to stable his horse, already wondering if he'd made a mistake. He didn't need complications in his life, and a widow from Boston with refined manners and educated speech was surely a complication. That night, dinner was different. The table was properly set, the food was flavorful, and most surprisingly, the children talked. Jacob, normally sullen and withdrawn, asked Cassandra questions about Boston and the Atlantic Ocean. Sarah recounted the story Cassandra had read to her that afternoon. Even little Thomas sat still longer than usual, captivated by the newcomer. Xavier said little, watching this transformation with a mixture of gratitude and unease. When the children were finally in bed, he found Cassandra washing the dishes in the kitchen. "You don't have to do that," he said, awkwardly standing in the doorway. "I don't mind," she replied, not turning around. "It's the least I can do for the roof over my head." "How long were you married?" The question came out before he could stop himself. Cassandra's hands stilled for a moment. 7 years. Charles died last winter. Consumption. You. 12 years. Eliza. Fever took her and half the town 2 summers ago. Cassandra nodded, understanding in her silence. "Your children are wonderful, Mr. Daniels. They miss their mother, but they're resilient." "Xavier," he said suddenly. "If you're living here, you might as well call me Xavier." She turned then, offering a small smile. "Then I'm Cassandra." An unexpected connection passed between them, brief but undeniable, the shared understanding of those who had loved and lost. "Good night, Cassandra," Xavier said, retreating to his room, where he sat on the edge of his bed and wondered how one woman could so quickly change the atmosphere of a home that had been shrouded in grief for 2 long years. The first weeks of Cassandra's stay established a new rhythm at the Broken Arrow. She rose early, preparing breakfast before Xavier headed out to work the ranch with his small crew of hired hands. The children helped with chores before lessons, which Cassandra conducted at the dining table until the schoolhouse was ready. Xavier often returned to find his children engaged in activities they had long abandoned, Sarah drawing with charcoal on scraps of paper, Thomas building elaborate structures with wooden blocks, and Jacob reading books that had sat untouched on shelves. One evening, Xavier returned later than usual after tracking a mountain lion that had been threatening the northern herd. The house was quiet, but a lamp still burned in the front room. He found Cassandra sitting in Eliza's old rocking chair, mending one of Thomas's shirts. "The children are asleep," she said softly. Jacob waited up as long as he could. Xavier nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. "Thank you for looking after them. They were worried about you," Cassandra said, her needle moving steadily through the fabric. "They've already lost one parent. The fear of losing another runs deep." Xavier stiffened. "I know how to take care of my family. I never suggested otherwise." Cassandra's voice remained even. "But children need more than food and shelter, Xavier. They need to know they're safe in all ways." "And what would a Boston lady know about safety out here?" he challenged, his defenses rising. Cassandra set down her mending and looked at him directly. "I buried my husband alone in the Colorado mountains during a blizzard. I traveled 300 miles by stagecoach with nothing but a small trunk and $10 to my name. I may not be a frontier woman by birth, but I've learned what it means to survive." Xavier felt properly chastened. "I'm sorry," he said gruffly. "It's been a long day." "I understand," she replied, her expression softening. "There's stew keeping warm on the stove if you're hungry." As she rose to leave, Xavier spoke again. "How do you do it? Stay so hopeful?" Cassandra paused, considering her answer. "My mother taught me that grief and hope can coexist. One doesn't negate the other." She smiled faintly. "And prayer helps." "Speaking of which, Sarah asked me today why your family doesn't pray before meals anymore." Xavier looked away. That was Eliza's domain. "I'm not much for talking to God these days. Faith can be a comfort for children, especially those who've experienced loss," Cassandra said gently. "But I won't overstep. Good night, Xavier." After she left, Xavier sat alone in the quiet house, thinking about how prayer had once been a natural part of their daily lives. Eliza had made sure of it. But after her death, he'd abandoned the practice, too angry at God to continue the tradition. The next morning at breakfast, Xavier cleared his throat after everyone was seated. "Sarah, would you like to say grace today?" His daughter looked surprised, then pleased. "Yes, Pa." As Sarah recited a simple prayer she remembered from when her mother was alive, Xavier caught Cassandra's eye across the table. She gave him a smile so warm and approving that something long dormant stirred within him. Days turned into weeks, and the schoolhouse in town was finally completed. Cassandra began teaching there, riding to and from town on a gentle mare Xavier had lent her. Yet she continued to live at the Broken Arrow, her presence becoming increasingly essential to their daily lives. One Saturday morning in late spring, Xavier found himself watching from the porch as Cassandra taught his children a game she had played in her childhood. Their laughter rang out across the yard, a sound that had been absent for too long. "You're good with them," he said when she joined him on the porch, slightly out of breath from running. "They make it easy," she replied, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "They're eager to learn, to play, to live." "They weren't before you came," Xavier admitted. "I was keeping them alive, but not much more." Cassandra leaned against the porch railing. "Grief affects everyone differently. You were doing your best." "Not good enough," he said, watching as Jacob showed his younger siblings how to spin a top he had carved under Cassandra's guidance. "You gave them safety and stability when they needed it most," Cassandra insisted. "Now you're giving them room to heal. That's a gift, Xavier." He turned to look at her, struck by how the sunlight caught the auburn highlights in her hair. "You've brought life back to this house, Cassandra. I don't know how to thank you for that." A blush colored her cheeks. "I should be thanking you. You gave me a home when I was alone in a strange place." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Xavier felt an unexpected surge of hope, a dangerous feeling for a man who had learned the hard cost of loss. The moment was broken by Thomas calling for Cassandra to see the butterfly he had caught in his hands. She smiled at Xavier before hurrying to join the children, leaving him to wonder about the new feelings taking root in his heart. That evening, a spring storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing with it torrential rain and fierce lightning. The children, particularly Thomas, had always been frightened of such storms. Xavier expected to hear crying from his youngest son's room, but the house remained quiet except for the thunder and the rain lashing against the windows. Curious, he checked on Thomas, only to find Cassandra sitting on the edge of the boy's bed, telling him a story about sailors who navigated through storms at sea. The brave captain knew that beyond every storm was clear sky, she was saying, her voice calm and melodic. Just as God promises us that after every hardship comes peace. Thomas's eyes were wide, but no longer fearful. Like after Mama died, there's peace coming. Xavier's breath caught in his throat as he waited for Cassandra's response. "Yes, Thomas," she said softly. "The storm of grief eventually passes, though we never forget those we've lost. Your mother is always with you in your heart, just as my husband remains in mine." Thomas seemed to consider this. "Does it hurt less after a while?" "It changes," Cassandra answered honestly. "The pain becomes something different, a reminder of how much we loved." From his place in the doorway, Xavier felt a tear track down his weathered cheek, the first he had allowed himself since Eliza's funeral. He quietly retreated before either Cassandra or Thomas noticed his presence. Later, when the storm had passed and the house was silent, Xavier sat at his desk with a piece of paper before him. He began to write, haltingly at first, then with increasing fluency, a letter to Eliza telling her about their children, about the changes in their lives, about the Boston widow who had brought laughter back into their home. It was a farewell of sorts, an acknowledgement that while he would always love her, perhaps his heart had room for new beginnings. The summer brought scorching heat and the arduous work of moving cattle to better grazing lands. Xavier was often away for days at a time, leaving Cassandra to manage the household. He worried about burdening her, but she assured him she was more than capable. "Teaching is finished for the summer," she reminded him, "and the children and I have our routines. We'll be fine." Still, returning from these trips always filled Xavier with a quiet anticipation. The sight of Cassandra waiting on the porch, often with Thomas on her hip and the older children nearby, stirred emotions he had thought long buried. During one particularly hot afternoon, Xavier returned to find the house empty. Concerned, he followed the sound of laughter to the creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property. There, in a shaded bend, he discovered Cassandra and the children splashing in the shallow water, their clothes soaked, their faces alight with joy. He stood watching, unnoticed, as Cassandra taught Sarah how to float on her back, supporting her with gentle hands while instructing. "Trust the water to hold you. Just breathe and relax." Jacob was showing Thomas how to skip stones, his adolescent awkwardness momentarily forgotten as he patiently demonstrated the proper technique. The scene before Xavier was one of such simple happiness that it almost hurt to witness. When Cassandra finally spotted him, her smile was radiant despite her sodden appearance. "Join us," she called. "The water's wonderful." Before he could respond, the children took up the cry, begging him to come in. To their delight and his own surprise, Xavier found himself removing his boots and wading into the creek, still fully clothed. "Paws in the water," Thomas shouted, as if announcing a miracle. Xavier splashed his youngest son playfully. "Did you think your old pa couldn't swim?" "You never swim with us," Sarah said, paddling over to him. "Well, today I am," Xavier replied, feeling lighter than he had in years. Later, as they walked back to the house, dripping but refreshed, Cassandra fell into step beside him while the children ran ahead. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "It was so hot, and the creek seemed perfect." "I don't mind," Xavier assured her. "It's good to see them playing like children should." "And you?" Cassandra asked, looking up at him. "Was it good for you too?" Xavier considered the question. "Yes," he admitted. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to just enjoy a moment." Cassandra smiled. "Those moments are precious, Xavier. They're what make life worth living." In that instant, with water dripping from his hat and his shirt clinging to his skin, Xavier realized he was falling in love with Cassandra Norton. The knowledge was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. As summer progressed, Xavier found himself creating reasons to spend time with Cassandra. He asked her opinion on ranch matters, invited her on rides to check the property boundaries, and even began sitting with her on the porch in the evenings after the children were asleep, sharing stories of their lives before they met. He learned that she had been a teacher in Boston before marrying Charles, that she loved poetry and could recite Wordsworth from memory, that she had always dreamed of seeing the Grand Canyon, and that despite her refined upbringing, she wasn't afraid of hard work or getting her hands dirty. In turn, he shared with her his childhood in Tennessee, his journey west as a young man seeking adventure, how he'd met Eliza in a small Kansas town while driving cattle, and how they'd built the Broken Arrow together from nothing but dreams and determination. "You've created something remarkable here," Cassandra told him one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "A legacy for your children." "It was Eliza's dream as much as mine," Xavier said. "Sometimes I wonder if I can keep it going without her." Cassandra's hand found his on the porch railing, a touch so light it might have been accidental, but he knew it wasn't. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Xavier. And you're not alone anymore." He turned his hand to clasp hers, a silent acknowledgement of what was growing between them. They sat that way until the stars emerged, neither needing words to express the comfort they found in each other's presence. The town's annual harvest festival in September brought a welcome celebration after months of hard work. Silver Creek was transformed with bunting and lanterns, the main street closed off for dancing, and tables laden with food prepared by the townswomen. Xavier had never enjoyed such gatherings after Eliza's death, attending only briefly for the children's sake. But this year, with Cassandra by their side, the event held new appeal. Cassandra wore a blue dress Xavier hadn't seen before, her hair arranged more elaborately than usual with a few curls framing her face. The children were scrubbed and dressed in their best, excited for the festivities. As they walked into town together, Xavier was aware of the curious glances and whispers that followed them. The handsome widower rancher and the refined widow schoolteacher had been the subject of gossip for months. "People are staring," Cassandra murmured as they approached the town square. "Let them," Xavier replied, surprising himself with his indifference to public opinion. "You look beautiful tonight." Cassandra's cheeks flushed with pleasure. "Thank you. You clean up rather nicely yourself, Mr. Daniels." The evening unfolded with a warmth Xavier hadn't anticipated. The children ran off to play games with their friends, leaving him and Cassandra to mingle with the townspeople. Many expressed their appreciation for Cassandra's teaching, and Xavier found himself filled with pride at her accomplishments. When the fiddlers struck up a lively tune and couples began to gather for dancing, Xavier hesitated, watching from the sidelines. It had been years since he'd danced, not since Eliza. "Mrs. Norton," a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Frank Wilson, the town's banker, a widower in his 40s. "May I have the pleasure of this dance?" Before Cassandra could respond, Xavier stepped forward. "I believe Mrs. Norton promised this dance to me." Cassandra's surprised expression quickly gave way to a pleased smile as she took Xavier's offered hand. "Indeed I did, Mr. Daniels." As he led her to the dance floor, Xavier leaned close to her ear. "I apologize for being presumptuous." "Don't apologize," she replied softly. "I would have refused him anyway." The music carried them through a Virginia reel, followed by a waltz that brought them closer together. Xavier was rusty but found his rhythm quickly, especially with a partner as graceful as Cassandra. "I haven't danced in years," he confessed as they moved across the wooden platform erected for the occasion. "You haven't forgotten how," she assured him, following his lead effortlessly. As the evening progressed, Xavier noticed Jacob watching them with an inscrutable expression. When the music paused, he excused himself to check on his son. "Everything all right, Jacob?" he asked, finding the boy leaning against a post at the edge of the festivities. Jacob shrugged, suddenly looking very young despite his attempts at maturity. "You seem different with Mrs. Norton." Xavier considered his response carefully. "Different how?" "Happier," Jacob said finally. "Like you used to be with Ma." A knot formed in Xavier's throat. "Would that bother you? If I were happy with Mrs. Norton?" Jacob looked at his feet, then back at his father. "Ma would want you to be happy, wouldn't she?" "I believe she would," Xavier agreed quietly. "Then I guess it's okay," Jacob said with the solemn wisdom of youth. "Sarah and Thomas already treat her like she's family anyway." Xavier placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Your mother will always be part of our family, Jacob. Nothing changes that." Jacob nodded, some tension easing from his young face. "I know, Pa." The conversation stayed with Xavier throughout the evening, weighing on his mind as he and Cassandra walked home under a canopy of stars, the children trudging sleepily ahead of them. "You're quiet," Cassandra observed, her arm linked through his. "Just thinking," Xavier replied. "Jacob noticed something between us." Cassandra tensed slightly beside him, and he gave his blessing, in his own way. Xavier stopped walking, turning to face her in the moonlight. "Cassandra, I need to ask you something." Her eyes searched his face, a mixture of hope and caution in her expression. "Yes. Your time at the schoolhouse is going well. I imagine you could afford one of those boarding houses in town now if you wanted." Confusion flitted across her features. "I suppose I could. Is that what you want?" "No," Xavier said firmly. "The opposite, in fact. I want to ask if you'd consider staying. Permanently." Cassandra's breath caught. "Xavier, I'm not asking properly," he said, taking her hands in his. "What I mean to say is that my children need you. They've flourished under your care. You've taught them to laugh again, to pray again, to hope again." He paused, gathering courage. "And I need you too, Cassandra. More than I ever thought I could need anyone after Eliza." Tears glistened in Cassandra's eyes. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Xavier nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife. Becoming a permanent part of our family." For a heart-stopping moment, Cassandra was silent, and Xavier feared he had misread everything, rushed too quickly past the boundaries of grief. Then she smiled, a smile that outshone the stars above them. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Xavier, I would be honored to become your wife." Relief and joy surged through him as he drew her close, kissing her for the first time beneath the vast Texas sky. It was a gentle kiss, full of promise and new beginnings. When they broke apart, Cassandra leaned her forehead against his. "I never expected to find love again," she confessed. "When Charles died, I thought that part of my life was over." "I felt the same after losing Eliza," Xavier admitted. "But you changed everything, Cassandra. You brought hope back to the broken arrow." From up ahead, Sarah's voice called out, "Pa? Mrs. Norton? Are you coming?" Xavier and Cassandra exchanged a smile before hurrying to catch up with the children. There would be time to share their news, time to plan their future together. For now, it was enough to walk side by side under the stars, their hearts full of newfound hope. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Silver Creek. Most of the townspeople responded with congratulations and well wishes, though a few raised eyebrows at the relatively short time since Cassandra's arrival. Xavier found he cared little for their opinions. He knew with certainty that what he and Cassandra shared was real and worth pursuing. The children's reactions varied. Thomas was simply delighted that Mrs. Norton would be staying forever. Sarah was excited about helping plan the wedding, and Jacob, though initially reserved, gradually warmed to the idea, especially after Cassandra asked for his help in surprising Xavier with a special gift. As autumn painted the landscape in rich golds and reds, wedding preparations began in earnest. They decided on a November ceremony, before winter set in, but after the fall cattle drive. It would be a simple affair at the small church in Silver Creek, followed by a celebration at the Broken Arrow. One crisp October afternoon, Xavier returned from checking fence lines to find Cassandra and Sarah in deep discussion at the kitchen table, fabric samples and sketches spread between them. "Pa," Sarah exclaimed when she saw him. "Mrs. Norton is letting me help design her wedding dress." "Isn't that wonderful?" "Very wonderful," Xavier agreed, smiling at his daughter's enthusiasm. "I'm sure it will be beautiful." "You're not allowed to see the design," Sarah informed him seriously. "It's bad luck." Xavier raised his hands in surrender. "I wouldn't dream of looking." After Sarah ran off to find her brothers, Xavier moved to stand behind Cassandra, placing his hands on her shoulders. "You're very good with her." Cassandra leaned back against him. "She reminds me of myself at that age, curious about everything, eager to create." "Have you thought about children of your own?" Xavier asked hesitantly. They hadn't discussed this aspect of their future together. Cassandra turned to look up at him, her expression open and honest. "I have. Charles and I tried, but it wasn't meant to be." She took his hand. "I've come to love your children as my own, Xavier. But yes, I would welcome a child of our own too, if God sees fit to bless us that way." Xavier squeezed her hand, touched by her candor. "I would like that too." The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy ones. The ranch demanded attention as winter approached, and Cassandra divided her time between teaching and preparing for her new role as Xavier's wife. Despite the busyness, there was a sense of joyful anticipation that permeated the household. 2 days before the wedding, a letter arrived from Boston. Cassandra's sister Charlotte had finally responded to the news of the engagement. Xavier found Cassandra on the porch, reading the letter with tears streaming down her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. Cassandra wiped at her tears, shaking her head. "Nothing's wrong. Charlotte is coming." "I never thought." She broke off, overcome with emotion. "She's my only family, and I thought she disapproved of my life out west. But she's coming to the wedding, Xavier. She'll be here tomorrow." Xavier sat beside her, relieved that the tears were happy ones. "That's wonderful news. She was so close to Charles," Cassandra explained. "I worried she might think I was betraying his memory by remarrying so soon." "And what does she say about that?" Xavier asked gently. Cassandra looked down at the letter. "She says Charles would want me to be happy, and that she can't wait to meet the man who's put joy back in my letters." She smiled through her tears. "She's bringing my mother's wedding veil. I thought I'd never see it again." Xavier pulled her close, understanding how much this meant to her. "Then our wedding will be perfect." The day before Charlotte's arrival, an unexpected visitor came to the Broken Arrow. Cassandra was in town collecting final items for the wedding when a rider approached the house. A tall, distinguished-looking man who introduced himself as William Norton, Charles's brother. Xavier greeted him cautiously, noting the man's expensive clothes and Eastern manner. "Cassandra didn't mention you were coming for the wedding." A flicker of something crossed William's face. "She doesn't know I'm here. May we speak privately, Mr. Daniels?" Inside the house, William refused refreshment and came straight to the point. "I'll be direct, Mr. Daniels. I believe my sister-in-law is making a grave mistake in marrying you." Xavier's jaw tightened. "Is that so?" "Cassandra belongs in Boston, among people of her own kind," William continued. "After Charles's death, she was distraught, not thinking clearly. This adventure out west was a way of running from her grief. But it's time she came home. Cassandra is a grown woman capable of making her own decisions," Xavier said evenly. "And she has decided to make her home here." William's expression hardened. "Do you know she was engaged to one of Boston's most prominent physicians before she met my brother? That she gave up a position at one of the finest ladies' academies in New England to marry Charles? Cassandra Norton is accustomed to a certain way of life, Mr. Daniels. How long before she grows tired of playing frontier wife and schoolmarm?" The words struck a nerve they were doubts Xavier himself had harbored in quiet moments. But he thought of Cassandra splashing in the creek with his children, Cassandra kneading bread by lamplight, Cassandra reading poetry on the porch as the sun set. "I think you underestimate your sister-in-law," Xavier said firmly. and you certainly underestimate her capacity for love and adaptation. Cassandra has built a life here, a life she's chosen freely. A life of hardship and isolation, William countered. A life of purpose and connection, Xavier corrected. But don't take my word for it. Speak to her yourself. She should be back within the hour. William stood, straightening his jacket. I intend to. And I'll be offering her passage back to Boston, a chance to reclaim the life she deserves. After William left to wait in town, Xavier paced the front room, wrestling with newfound insecurities. What if William was right? What if Cassandra was settling for less than she deserved? The life he could offer was comfortable but modest, a far cry from the refined world she had left behind. When Cassandra finally returned, her face flushed with excitement over wedding preparations, Xavier struggled to find the words to tell her about William's visit. What's wrong? She asked immediately, noting his expression. You had a visitor, he said. William Norton is in town. He wants to speak with you. Cassandra paled. William is here? What? Xavier hesitated, then decided honesty was essential. He came to convince you to return to Boston. He believes you're making a mistake by staying here. By marrying me. Understanding dawned in Cassandra's eyes. And you're worried he might be right. It wasn't a question, and Xavier didn't deny it. The life you had before is not the life I want now, Cassandra interrupted firmly. She moved to stand before him, taking his hands in hers. Xavier, look at me. I came west by choice, not just for Charles but for myself. I wanted a different life, one with purpose beyond social obligations and appearances. But the comforts you had were no substitute for genuine connection, Cassandra insisted. Do you think I haven't considered what I'm choosing? I've had months to contemplate my decision, Xavier. I choose this life. I choose your children. I choose you. The certainty in her voice steadied him. William said you were engaged before Charles, to a prominent physician. Cassandra's laugh surprised him. Edward Pembroke. A match arranged by our families that neither of us particularly wanted. When I met Charles, it gave us both an honorable way out of the engagement. She squeezed Xavier's hands. I have never regretted a day spent here, not even in the beginning when everything was strange and difficult. Xavier searched her face, finding only sincerity. I needed to hear that. Then hear this too, Cassandra said softly. I love you, Xavier Daniels. Not despite your life here, but because of it. Because of the man you are, honest, hardworking, devoted to your children. I want to be your wife, to help you raise your family, to grow old with you on this land you love so much. Xavier pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. I love you too, Cassandra. More than I ever thought possible after losing Eliza. Then we're agreed, she said, her voice muffled against his chest. And I'll tell William exactly that when I see him. The confrontation with William in town the next day was brief but intense. Cassandra stood her ground, making it clear that her decision was final. William eventually relented, though not without a parting shot about the door to Boston remaining open when she came to her senses. To Xavier's surprise, William appeared at the church on their wedding day, sitting quietly in the back. It was a gesture of reluctant acceptance that meant more to Cassandra than she had expected. Charlotte's arrival brought a different energy altogether. Unlike William, she embraced her sister's new life wholeheartedly, charming the children and offering Xavier a warm welcome to the family. I've never seen Cassie so vibrant, she told Xavier the evening before the wedding as they watched Cassandra and the children decorating the house with evergreen boughs and ribbon. Charles would be pleased, you know. He always worried about leaving her alone. The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, the November air carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. The small church in Silver Creek was filled to capacity with townspeople, ranchers from neighboring properties, and Cassandra's students, who had insisted on attending their beloved teacher's wedding. Xavier stood at the altar, Jacob beside him as his best man, waiting for his bride. When the doors opened and Cassandra appeared on William's arm, a gesture of reconciliation that had moved her to tears, Xavier felt his breath catch. She was radiant in a gown of ivory silk, simple yet elegant, with Charlotte's veil floating around her like a cloud. But it was her smile that captivated him, open, joyful, and directed entirely at him. As she reached his side and placed her hand in his, Xavier felt a sense of rightness so profound it nearly overwhelmed him. The minister's words washed over them as they exchanged vows and rings, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "Mr. Daniels, you may kiss your bride." The kiss they shared was a promise, a beginning, a declaration of love that had blossomed from unexpected soil. When they turned to face their guests, Xavier caught sight of his children's beaming faces in the front pew, Jacob standing tall and proud, Sarah clutching a small bouquet identical to Cassandra's, and Thomas barely containing his excitement. The celebration at the Broken Arrow lasted well into the night. The barn had been transformed with lanterns and garlands, tables laden with food prepared by the women of Silver Creek. There was music and dancing, laughter and tears of joy. As the evening waned, Xavier found a moment alone with his new wife, drawing her away from the festivities to the quiet of the porch. "Happy, Mrs. Daniels?" he asked, still marveling at the change in her title. Cassandra's eyes sparkled in the lamplight. "Deliriously so, Mr. Daniels." He brushed a curl from her face, his touch reverent. "I never thought I'd find this again, this feeling of completeness." "Nor did I," Cassandra admitted. "It feels like a miracle, doesn't it? Finding each other when we both thought that part of life was over." Xavier nodded, drawing her closer. "A miracle indeed. And I plan to be grateful for it every day of our lives together." Their kiss was interrupted by Sarah calling from the barn doorway. "Pa, Mrs. Daniels, you're missing the last dance." Cassandra laughed at her new name, joy bubbling up irrepressibly. "We can't miss the last dance," she told Xavier, tugging him back toward the celebration. Hand in hand, they returned to their guests, to the music and laughter, to the beginning of their life together. Spring arrived at the Broken Arrow with a riot of wildflowers and the steady rhythm of new life. The ranch prospered under Xavier and Cassandra's combined efforts, his practical knowledge of the land complemented by her organizational skills and fresh perspectives. The children thrived with Cassandra as their stepmother. She brought a balance to their lives that had been missing, encouraging their education while respecting Xavier's lessons about hard work and responsibility. Jacob, now 12, had developed a keen interest in the business aspects of ranching, often sitting with Xavier in the evenings to learn about cattle prices and breeding records. Sarah's artistic talents flourished under Cassandra's guidance, her drawings showing remarkable skill for a child of 10. And Thomas, at 8, remained the family's bright spirit, his natural exuberance tempered now with the thoughtfulness Cassandra gently cultivated. On a warm May afternoon, almost exactly a year after Cassandra had first arrived at the Broken Arrow, Xavier returned from town to find his family gathered under the old oak tree that shaded the western side of the house. They had spread blankets on the ground and appeared to be having a picnic, lesson books and papers mixed with plates of food. As he approached, Xavier heard Cassandra reading aloud from what sounded like a book of poetry, her voice carrying on the gentle breeze. The children were listening attentively, even Jacob, who typically preferred practical knowledge to literature. Xavier dismounted quietly, wanting to observe the scene without interrupting. Thomas spotted him first, jumping up with his usual enthusiasm. "Pa's home," he announced, breaking the spell of the reading. Cassandra looked up, shading her eyes against the sun. The smile that spread across her face still had the power to quicken Xavier's heartbeat. "You're early," she said as he joined them on the blanket. "Business in town went faster than expected," he replied, accepting the plate she handed him. "What are you reading?" "Wordsworth," she said. "I was telling the children about the Lake District in England where he lived. We're planning an imaginary journey." "Can we really go to England someday, Pa?" Sarah asked eagerly. Xavier exchanged a glance with Cassandra, amused by their daughter's ambition. "Perhaps someday. For now, I think your stepmother's stories will have to suffice." The afternoon passed pleasantly, with Xavier joining the impromptu lesson. Later, as the children helped pack up the remains of the picnic, Cassandra drew him aside, a certain nervousness in her manner that immediately caught his attention. "Is everything all right?" he asked, concerned. Cassandra nodded, her eyes bright with emotion. "Everything is perfect, actually. I've been waiting for the right moment to tell you." She took a deep breath. "Xavier, we're going to have a baby." Joy surged through him, swift and powerful. "A baby? You're sure?" "The doctor confirmed it yesterday when I was in town," she said, her hands moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. "I'm due in November, almost exactly on our anniversary." Xavier pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Cassandra, that's wonderful news." Their embrace was interrupted by Sarah's curious voice. "What's wonderful news?" Xavier and Cassandra turned to find all three children watching them with interest. Cassandra looked to Xavier, who nodded encouragingly. "Well," Cassandra began, her voice gentle but excited, "your father and I have just been discussing an addition to our family. You're going to have a new brother or sister come November." There was a moment of stunned silence, then an eruption of questions and exclamations. Thomas wanted to know where babies came from, a question deftly redirected by Cassandra. Sarah immediately began planning what the baby would need, and Jacob, after his initial surprise, offered a shy smile that spoke volumes about his acceptance. That evening, after the children were in bed, Xavier found Cassandra on the porch swing he had built for her as a Christmas gift. She was knitting something small, a baby booty, he realized with a surge of emotion. "You've made them happy," he said, sitting beside her. "All of us." Cassandra leaned against him, her needles continuing their steady rhythm. "They've made me happy too. I never imagined having such a full life again after Charles died." Xavier covered her hands with his, stilling her work. "When Eliza died, I thought the best parts of my life were behind me. I was just existing, trying to keep the ranch going for the children's sake." He kissed her temple. "Then you arrived and taught us all how to live again, how to pray, how to laugh, how to hope." "It wasn't just me," Cassandra protested softly. "You were ready to open your heart again. You just needed a little reminder of what was possible." "More than a little," Xavier admitted with a wry smile. "I was stubborn." "Determined," Cassandra corrected, resuming her knitting. "It's one of the things I love about you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The sounds of the ranch settling for the night surrounded them, horses nickering softly in the stable, a distant coyote call, the creak of the windmill turning in the gentle breeze. "I was thinking," Xavier said after a while, "about names for the baby." Cassandra looked up with interest. "Oh, do you have ideas?" "If it's a girl," he said carefully, "I thought perhaps Elizabeth after Eliza. But if you'd prefer, I think that's beautiful," Cassandra interrupted, her eyes soft with understanding. "And if it's a boy, perhaps Charles, after my husband?" Xavier nodded, throat tight with emotion at her generosity of spirit. "Elizabeth or Charles, honoring the past while embracing our future. Our very bright future," Cassandra agreed, placing his hand on her abdomen where their child grew. "Built on love, twice blessed." As the stars multiplied above the broken arrow, Xavier Daniels held his wife close, marveling at the journey that had brought them together, a lonely widower and a grieving widow, finding in each other the strength to begin again, to create a family forged from loss but sustained by hope. In the years that followed, the Daniels family would face challenges and celebrate triumphs, weathering the storms of life with the resilience that comes from deep roots and shared faith. But on that spring night, with the promise of new life quickening beneath their joined hands, Xavier and Cassandra simply savored the miracle of their present happiness, a testament to the enduring power of love to heal, to transform, and to redeem even the most broken hearts.